The morning sun had barely touched the polished marble floors of the Grand Plaza Hotel when Lynn arrived for her shift. At 17, she was the youngest of the cleaning staff and often assigned the earliest hours. She didn't mind. The quiet moments before the hotel came alive were her favorite part of the day. Lynn adjusted her uniform, a plain gray dress with a white apron that somehow always felt too big for her small frame, and gathered her cleaning supplies. The hotel was a world away from her tiny apartment where she lived with her grandmother. Here, everything gleamed with a richness she could only dream about. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the high ceilings. Plush red carpets stretched down hallways lined with oil paintings in gold frames. And in the main ballroom, the thing that made her heart skip a beat every time she saw it, a magnificent black grand piano. "You're daydreaming again," said Mrs. Chen, the head of housekeeping, her voice firm but not unkind. "The East Wing needs attention before the conference starts." "Yes." "Mrs. Chen," Lynn replied, quickly pushing her cart toward the elevators. For 6 months, Lynn had worked at the Grand Plaza, taking the job after her grandmother's medical bills had piled up. School had become a luxury they could no longer afford. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and Mr. Harrison, the hotel owner, was rarely around to bother the staff. But that had changed 2 weeks ago. Mr. Harrison had returned from his business ventures abroad, and suddenly the atmosphere in the hotel had shifted. He was a tall man with cold blue eyes that seemed to find fault in everything they landed on. The staff whispered about his past, how he had once been a successful music producer in the city, how a scandal had ruined his reputation, how he had poured his remaining fortune into the hotel as a way to rebuild his name. Lynn tried to stay invisible around him. She'd seen how he spoke to the other staff, his words sharp enough to cut. By midday, Lynn had finished cleaning the conference rooms and moved on to the ballroom. The hotel was hosting a charity gala that evening, and everything needed to be perfect. As she dusted the ornate moldings and polished the brass fixtures, she kept glancing at the piano. It sat on a small raised platform at one end of the room, its lid propped open like a dark wing. The ballroom was empty. Lynn looked at her watch. Her break wasn't for another 20 minutes, but she had worked efficiently and was ahead of schedule. She glanced around once more before setting down her cloth and walking over to the piano. She didn't sit, she wouldn't dare, but she stood beside it, her fingers hovering just above the keys without touching them. Lynn closed her eyes and imagined the weight of the ivory beneath her fingertips, the resistance as she pressed down, the clear, perfect note that would ring out. "It's just a piano, not a shrine." Lynn jumped at the voice, her eyes flying open. Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway of the ballroom, watching her with an expression of cold amusement. His expensive suit was impeccably tailored, making him look more like a statue than a man. "I'm sorry, sir," Lynn said, backing away from the piano. "I was just what?" he asked, walking toward her with measured steps. "Neglecting your duties to admire an instrument you probably can't even play?" Lynn felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I was on my way to clean the mirrors, sir." Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "The truth is, I've noticed you lingering around this piano before. Several times, in fact." Lynn's heart sank. She hadn't thought anyone had seen her. Sometimes, on her breaks, she would come to the empty ballroom just to look at the piano. Once, she had even sat on the bench for a few precious seconds before fear of being caught had sent her scurrying back to work. "I'm sorry," she repeated, unable to meet his gaze. "It won't happen again." "You're right about that," he said. His voice had a strange edge to it now, something almost like anticipation. "Because I think we need to address this fascination of yours." The door to the ballroom opened again, and several hotel staff entered, carrying flower arrangements for the evening's event. Behind them came a group of well-dressed people whom Lynn recognized as members of the charity board, arriving early to check the preparations. Mr. Harrison glanced at them, and a slow smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, what's your name?" he asked. "Lynn, sir." "Lin Zhou." "Well, Lin Zhou, since you're so drawn to this piano, perhaps you'd like to play it." Lynn's eyes widened. "No, sir, I wasn't. I insist," he said, raising his voice enough that the others in the room turned to look. "Everyone, may I have your attention? One of our housekeeping staff has been admiring our grand piano, and I've invited her to play something for us." The room fell silent. The staff froze, uncertain what was happening. The charity board members looked confused but politely interested. Mrs. Chen, who had just entered with a clipboard, stared at Lin with a mixture of concern and warning. "Sir?" "Please," Lin whispered, mortified. "I should get back to work." "Nonsense," Mr. Harrison said loudly. "I'm the owner, and I'm giving you permission to take a break and entertain us." His voice dropped so only she could hear. "Unless you'd prefer to look for employment elsewhere." Lin felt trapped. The job was her family's lifeline. Her grandmother's medication, their rent, food on the table, all of it depended on her steady paycheck. With trembling legs, she walked to the piano bench and sat down. The room swam before her eyes as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She hadn't touched a real piano in 3 years, not since her family had been forced to sell their upright to pay rent after her parents' accident. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she could feel Mr. Harrison standing just behind her, watching, waiting for her to embarrass herself. "Perhaps something simple," he suggested, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mary had a little lamb? Or is that too advanced?" Someone gasped, one of the charity board members, shocked at his rudeness. But most just watched uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge the owner of the hotel. Lin stared at the black and white keys, feeling a familiar pattern calling to her fingers despite her fear. Before their world had crumbled, before the accident and the bills and the desperate choices, she had been someone else, a girl with dreams, with music in her soul, with a teacher who had once called her the most promising student he'd ever taught. 3 years without a piano hadn't erased what lived in her muscle memory, what she practiced on tabletops and in her mind during long bus rides to work. The pieces she heard in her dreams, the music that was her only inheritance from her father, a concert pianist whose career had been cut short by the same crash that took his life. Mr. Harrison leaned closer. "We're waiting," he whispered. "Show us what you can do, cleaning girl." Something shifted inside Lin. A spark of anger broke through her fear. This man thought he knew her, thought he could use her love of music to humiliate her. He saw a small, timid girl in a too-big uniform and decided she was nothing. He was wrong. Lin placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory against her fingertips for the first time in years. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. Not Mary Had a Little Lamb, not a simple tune or a halting beginner's piece. Her fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Ballet No. 1 in G minor, a piece of haunting beauty and immense technical difficulty. Her father had been playing it the night he met her mother. He had taught it to Lin when she was 14, the last piece they had worked on together before he was gone. The first gentle notes filled the ballroom, hesitant at first, like raindrops before a storm. Then her fingers remembered, her body remembered, and the music began to flow from her with growing confidence. Lin didn't see the shock on Mr. Harrison's face as he stepped back. She didn't notice the staff members stopping their work to stare, or the charity board members exchanging impressed glances. She didn't see Mrs. Chen's hand fly to her mouth in astonishment. Lin was lost in the music, in the complex emotions of the piece, the longing, the hope, the bittersweet memories it carried. Her small body swayed on the bench as her hands moved across the keyboard with increasing assurance. The piece built in intensity, and she surrendered to it completely. For those moments, she wasn't a hotel cleaner playing a rich man's piano. She was simply Lin, the daughter of a pianist, the girl who had once been destined for conservatory before life intervened, the girl who still, despite everything, carried music in her heart. And as the final notes of the introduction gave way to the main theme, a strange sensation washed over her, the feeling of coming home after a long, long absence. 3 years of silence ended with every press of a key, every cascade of notes, every swell of emotion that poured from her fingers. Mr. Harrison stood frozen, his plan to humiliate her crumbling with each perfect note. This was no fumbling attempt by an ignorant girl. This was artistry. This was talent that couldn't be taught, couldn't be bought, the very thing he had spent his career claiming to recognize and cultivate in others, and he had found it cleaning his floors. Lin was only vaguely aware of the crowd gathering behind her. Hotel guests passing through the lobby had heard the music and wandered in. Staff members found reasons to linger near the ballroom doors. Even the kitchen crew, normally too busy to take breaks, peeked in one by one. The piece was challenging, full of emotional swings from tender melancholy to passionate intensity. 3 years ago, Lynn had struggled with certain passages, her young hands stretching to reach difficult chords. But now, despite the long absence from a real piano, something had awakened in her. Her fingers found their way across the keys as if guided by an invisible force, muscle memory returning with each measure. Mr. Harrison's face had turned an uncomfortable shade of red. This was not how his plan was supposed to unfold. The cleaning girl should have fumbled, hit wrong notes, revealed herself as the uncultured nobody he had assumed her to be. Instead, she was transforming his attempt at humiliation into her moment of triumph. "Remarkable," whispered one of the charity board members, a silver-haired woman in an expensive suit. Where on earth did she learn to play like that? Mr. Harrison had no answer. He stepped back, trying to distance himself from the situation he had created. Lynn's grandmother had always told her that music was a language that spoke directly to the heart. As a child, Lynn hadn't fully understood what that meant. Now as she played, she felt it. With each note, she was telling her story. The joy of her early childhood, the grief of losing her parents, the struggle to survive, and through it all, the love of music that had sustained her. The ballroom, with its perfect acoustics, carried the sound to every corner. The piano itself seemed to respond to her touch, producing a richer, warmer tone than when the hired professionals played at hotel events. This was what Mr. Harrison had spent his career searching for before his fall from grace. Raw, authentic talent that couldn't be manufactured. Lynn reached the most technically demanding section of the piece. Her hands flew across the keyboard in a flurry of notes that seemed impossible for someone who hadn't practiced in years. A small frown of concentration appeared between her eyebrows as she navigated the passage. For a brief moment she faltered, a slightly missed note, a tiny hesitation. Mr. Harrison noticed, and a glimmer of satisfaction flickered across his face. But before he could feel any real victory, Lynn recovered and pushed forward, the slight imperfection only making her performance more human, more genuine. Mrs. Chen stood by the door, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. She had hired Lynn 6 months ago, impressed by the girl's quiet determination and work ethic. Never once had Lynn mentioned music or playing the piano. Now Mrs. Chen understood the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in the girl's eyes when she thought no one was watching. As the piece approached its conclusion, Lynn's body swayed with the music, her face transformed. Gone was the timid cleaning girl, replaced by an artist lost in her craft. The final notes rang out, lingering in the air with a bittersweet resonance before fading into silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if everyone in the room was holding their breath, still caught in the spell Lynn had cast. Then the applause began. It started with the charity board members and quickly spread to the hotel guests and staff. The sound filled the ballroom, bouncing off the high ceilings and ornate walls. Lynn's eyes flew open. The music had carried her away, and she had forgotten where she was. Forgotten the hotel, forgotten Mr. Harrison, forgotten everything except the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers. Now reality came rushing back. Dozens of people were staring at her, clapping, some even wiping away tears. Her cheeks flushed as she stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. She smoothed down her uniform with trembling hands and gave a small instinctive bow, the way her father had taught her after performances. "That was extraordinary," said the silver-haired woman approaching the piano. "I'm Vera Wong, chair of the Arts Foundation. Young lady, where did you study?" Lynn looked at the floor. "I didn't, ma'am. Not formally. My father taught me." "Your father must be an exceptional pianist," Vera said. Lynn's voice grew quieter. "He was. He passed away 3 years ago." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the onlookers. Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that his cruel joke had backfired spectacularly. What's more, he had done it in front of Vera Wong, one of the city's most influential arts patrons and a major donor to the hotel's charity events. "And you haven't played since?" Vera asked, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Lynn shook her head. "We had to sell our piano. This is the first time I've played since then." Vera turned to Mr. Harrison, her eyes sharp with disapproval. "You have this young woman cleaning floors when she plays like that? With no piano of her own to practice on? What a waste of extraordinary talent." Mr. Harrison forced a tight smile. "I had no idea, of course. The hotel has many employees. I can't be expected to know their hobbies." "That's not a hobby," said a deep voice from the back of the crowd. A tall man with gray-streaked hair pushed forward. He wore the uniform of the hotel's head chef, though few guests ever saw him outside the kitchen. That's a gift. I've worked here 15 years and I've heard many pianists play that instrument. None like her. Lynn recognized the chef but had never spoken to him. He rarely interacted with the cleaning staff, staying in his domain while she worked in hers. Thank you, she said softly, overwhelmed by the attention. What's your name? Vera asked. Lin Zhao, ma'am. Well, Lin Zhao, I'd like to speak with you further. The foundation has several programs for young musicians, including scholarships. Lin's heart skipped a beat. Scholarships? Yes, full scholarships for deserving students. We also have access to practice facilities. Vera glanced pointedly at Mr. Harrison. I'm sure your employer wouldn't mind sparing you for an hour to discuss your future. Before Mr. Harrison could respond, Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Of course we wouldn't mind, she said firmly. Lynn can take her break now. I'll cover for her. Mr. Harrison's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. He was trapped by his own actions and the audience he had gathered. Of course, he finally managed. The hotel is always happy to support talented individuals. Lynn couldn't believe what was happening. Just 15 minutes ago, she had been dusting light fixtures, trying to be invisible. Now people were talking about scholarships and her future. I still have work to finish, she said hesitantly, looking at her cleaning card in the corner. Nonsense, said Vera, taking Lynn gently by the arm. Someone else can dust for one day. We have more important matters to discuss. As Vera led her toward a quiet corner of the hotel's cafe, Lynn passed close to Mr. Harrison. Their eyes met briefly. His were cold with anger and something else, perhaps fear. In his attempt to put her in her place, he had inadvertently revealed her true worth. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone of what he had lost, his ability to recognize and nurture musical talent. Wait, Lynn said suddenly, stopping. She turned to face Mr. Harrison directly, gathering courage she didn't know she had. Thank you, sir. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. For what? For insisting I play. I might never have touched a piano again otherwise. For a moment, Mr. Harrison seemed speechless. Then his expression hardened. Don't get ahead of yourself, Miss Zhao. One pretty performance doesn't make you a musician. The world is full of people who can play notes correctly. Vera's grip on Lynn's arm tightened slightly. Come, dear. Some people can't recognize the difference between playing notes and making music. It's why they fail in the industry. The pointed comment hit its mark. A muscle twitched in Mr. Harrison's jaw as he watched them walk away. Lynn followed Vera to the cafe, her mind whirling. Just that morning, she had been worried about making next month's rent. Now she was discussing music schools with the chair of an arts foundation. Tell me about your father, Vera said as they sat down. He must have been quite the teacher. Lynn took a deep breath and began to tell the story she had kept locked inside for 3 years. As she spoke, she felt something shifting inside her, as if pieces of herself that had been scattered were slowly coming back together. Outside the cafe windows, rain began to fall, gentle at first and then harder, drumming against the glass in a rhythm that reminded Lynn of the opening notes of the Chopin piece. The same piece her father had played the night he met her mother. The piece that had just changed her life. The next morning, Lynn arrived at the hotel an hour earlier than usual. She wanted to finish her work quickly, hoping to steal a few minutes at the piano before the ballroom filled with people. Sleep had been impossible. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt the ivory keys beneath her fingers and heard the music that had poured from her soul after 3 years of silence. The hotel was eerily quiet at dawn. Lynn slipped through the service entrance, changed into her uniform, and began her usual routine. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she noticed a light under Mr. Harrison's office door. Normally, he never arrived before 10. Lynn quickened her pace, hoping to avoid an encounter. Too late. The door swung open just as she passed. Miss Zhao? His voice was cold. A moment of your time. Lynn followed him into the office, a room she had cleaned countless times but never entered, while he was present. Mr. Harrison sat behind his massive desk but did not offer her a chair. I've been informed that you discussed scholarship opportunities with Mrs. Wong yesterday. He tapped a pen against a stack of papers. I want to be clear about something. You are employed by this hotel. Your contract states that you require 2 weeks' notice before termination of employment. Lynn's heart sank. Are you firing me, sir? Not at all. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm merely reminding you of your obligations. The hotel is entering its busiest season. We can't have staff abandoning their posts on a whim. I wouldn't do that, Lynn said quietly. I need this job. Good. Because while playing the piano might make for a nice hobby, it rarely pays the bills. He leaned forward. I know this industry, Miss Zhao. I've seen hundreds of talented people come and go. Most end up waiting tables or, yes, cleaning hotels. Lynn stood straighter, finding courage in the memory of yesterday's applause. My father always said music isn't about making money. It's about making something beautiful in a world that often isn't. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened. Your father died poor, didn't he? My point exactly. The cruel words hit Lynn like a physical blow. She bit her lip to keep from crying. You may go, Mr. Harrison said, already turning his attention to his computer. And since you're so dedicated to your job, you can cover Tanya's shift this weekend. She's called in sick. Lynn nodded stiffly and left. Her hands trembled as she gripped her cleaning cart. The extra shift would mean missing her first meeting with the music teacher Vera had arranged, but she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not yet. As she worked, Lynn replayed Mr. Harrison's words in her mind. Why did he care if she pursued music? Why try to crush her dream before it had even fully formed? She remembered something her grandmother often said. When someone tries to blow out your candle, it's because they're afraid of your light. By mid-morning, Lynn had cleaned most of the east wing and was heading toward the ballroom. She paused at the doorway, surprised to see it already occupied. The hotel's event manager was speaking with a group of people in business attire. Lynn recognized a few of them as regular clients who often booked the space for corporate functions. As you can see, the acoustics are excellent, the manager was saying. Perfect for your company orchestra performance. And you mentioned a house pianist? Asked one of the clients. The manager hesitated. Well, we usually bring in musicians as needed. But we recently discovered extraordinary talent right here on our staff, interrupted a familiar voice. Mrs. Chen had entered behind Lynn and now gently pushed her forward. In fact, this is her. All eyes turned to Lynn, who froze in her cleaning uniform, mop still in hand. This is the girl you mentioned? Asked the client, eyebrows raised in surprise. Yes, said Mrs. Chen firmly. Lin Zhao. She gave quite a performance yesterday. Perhaps she could demonstrate again? Lin shot a panicked look at Mrs. Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, Lin set down her mop and walked to the piano. This time there was no fear, only a strange sense of coming home as she sat on the bench. She chose a different piece, Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 16, bright and joyful, a contrast to yesterday's emotional Chopin. As the music filled the room, Lynn noticed movement at the ballroom entrance. Mr. Harrison stood there watching with an unreadable expression. Instead of faltering, Lynn played with even more conviction, letting the music speak for her. When she finished, the small audience applauded enthusiastically. Wonderful, exclaimed the lead client. Would she be available to play at our event? It would add such a personal touch to have a hotel staff member with this kind of talent. Before the manager could respond, Mr. Harrison stepped forward. I'm afraid Miss Zhao's duties keep her quite busy. She wouldn't have time to prepare a proper program. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. Actually, I've already adjusted the cleaning schedules. Lynn can take 2 hours each day to practice at my discretion. She smiled sweetly at Mr. Harrison. As head of housekeeping, I do have that authority. A tense silence fell over the room. The clients looked back and forth between Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Chen, sensing the conflict but not understanding its source. Finally, Mr. Harrison forced a tight smile. Of course. If Mrs. Chen has arranged it, then it's settled. He turned to the clients. We at the Grand Plaza pride ourselves on recognizing talent in unexpected places. The lead client beamed. Excellent. We'd like to book the ballroom for our company's anniversary next month with Ms. Zhao as the featured pianist. After they left, Mr. Harrison turned to Lynn with cold fury in his eyes. A word, Miss Zhao. Mrs. Chen stepped between them. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, but Lynn has rooms to clean and then practice time scheduled. Your word will have to wait. For a moment, Lynn thought Mr. Harrison might explode with anger. Instead, he straightened his tie and walked away without another word. Thank you, Lynn whispered to Mrs. Chen. The older woman smiled. My son played violin before he moved away. I know what music means to a young heart. She patted Lynn's shoulder. Now hurry with your work so you can practice. You have a professional engagement to prepare for. For the next week, Lynn fell into a new routine. She arrived early, worked efficiently, and spent 2 precious hours each day at the piano. Sometimes other staff members would slip in to listen. The chef would bring her tea and pastries, claiming they were leftovers, though Lynn suspected he made them especially for her. Even some regular hotel guests began timing their visits to the lobby around her practice sessions. Word spread quickly through the hotel's network of employees. The housekeeping staff covered for her when needed. The maintenance man tuned the piano himself, refusing payment. The security guard kept curious people from interrupting her practice time. Only Mr. Harrison remained coldly distant. He would sometimes stand in the shadows, listening, his expression a mixture of anger and something harder to define, perhaps regret, or longing. One afternoon, as Lynn practiced a particularly difficult passage, she sensed someone watching her. Looking up, she saw not Mr. Harrison but an elegant elderly woman leaning on a cane. "Don't stop on my account," the woman said, making her way to a chair near the piano. "I've been hearing about you from the staff. They call you the cleaning girl who plays like an angel." Lynn blushed. "I'm not that good." "Nonsense. False modesty helps no one." The woman sat down with a sigh. "I'm Rose Thompson. I've been staying in this hotel for 30 years, twice annually." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson." "It's Professor Thompson, actually. Retired now, but old habits die hard." She tapped her cane on the floor. "I taught at the Westridge Conservatory for 40 years. Lynn's eyes widened. Westridge was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. "You have a gift," Professor Thompson continued. "But gift is just the beginning. What you do with it is what matters." "I'm trying to figure that out," Lynn admitted. "Everything's happening so fast." Professor Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "I heard about your scholarship opportunity, and about your employer's reluctance." Lynn glanced around nervously. "Mr. Harrison is just concerned about staffing." "Mr. Harrison is concerned about his ego," Professor Thompson said bluntly. "I know his type. I taught them for decades. Talented enough to recognize greatness in others, but not talented enough to achieve it themselves. It makes them bitter." Lynn didn't know how to respond. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. "Play for me," Professor Thompson said suddenly. "Something that matters to you. Not for a hotel guest or an event, just for the music itself." Lynn thought for a moment, then began to play. Not a classical piece this time, but a simple folk melody her father used to play when she was small. A lullaby from her grandmother's village, passed down through generations. She added her own embellishments, turning the simple tune into something rich with emotion and memory. When she finished, Professor Thompson had tears in her eyes. "That's what they can never take from you," she said softly. "The music that lives in your heart." From the doorway, unnoticed by either of them, Mr. Harrison listened, his hand gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles turned white. In that moment, as the simple lullaby faded, something inside him seemed to break, the bitter shell he had built around himself cracking just enough to let in a sliver of light. The day of the corporate event arrived faster than Lynn expected. For 2 weeks, she had divided her time between her cleaning duties and piano practice. Her hands were raw from both work. The harsh cleaning chemicals had begun to dry her skin, and the hours at the piano left her fingers tender and sore. Yet she wouldn't have traded a minute of it. Lynn stood in the staff room, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Mrs. Chen had helped her find a suitable outfit for the performance, a simple black dress borrowed from her niece. It was a far cry from her gray cleaning uniform. "You look beautiful," said Mrs. Chen, adjusting the collar. Like a real concert pianist, Lynn smoothed the unfamiliar fabric nervously. "I don't feel ready." "Nobody ever feels ready," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "That's how you know it matters." A knock at the door interrupted them. The hotel's assistant manager poked his head in. "They're starting to arrive. Mr. Harrison wants to speak with you before you go on." Lynn's stomach tightened. She hadn't spoken directly to Mr. Harrison since their confrontation in his office. Though she often felt his eyes on her during her practice sessions, he had kept his distance. She found him standing near the piano in the ballroom, watching the corporate guests filter in. He wore an expensive suit and a carefully neutral expression. "Ms. Zhao," he said without looking at her, "I trust you're prepared?" Yes, sir. Good. These people are important clients. They spend over $1 million annually on events here. Now he turned to face her fully. I expect you to play the agreed program, nothing experimental. Lynn nodded. The program had been carefully selected. Pleasant background music for the cocktail hour, followed by more substantial pieces during dinner. Nothing too challenging for the audience, but nothing too simple either. And afterward, Mr. Harrison continued, you'll remember your place here. This performance doesn't change your position at the hotel. Before Lynn could respond, a man in a tailored suit approached them. Mr. Harrison, is this our pianist for the evening? Mr. Harrison's demeanor changed instantly, his cold expression replaced by a charming smile. Indeed, Thomas, meet Lin Zhao, our resident artist. Lin, this is Thomas Wu, CEO of Global Tech Solutions. Thomas extended his hand to Lin. A pleasure. I hear you have quite a talent. Thank you, sir, Lin said, shaking his hand. I hope you enjoy the music tonight. I'm sure I will. In fact, Thomas glanced at Mr. Harrison, then back to Lin. I was wondering if you might add a piece to your program. My mother's birthday is today, and she always loved Debussy's Clair de Lune. Would that be possible? Lin hesitated. Clair de Lune wasn't on the approved program. She looked at Mr. Harrison, whose smile had frozen in place. I'd be happy to play it, she said finally. For your mother. Wonderful. Thomas beamed. She would have been 90 today. It was her favorite. As Thomas walked away, Mr. Harrison gripped Lin's arm. I told you to stick to the program. It's just one piece, Lin said, pulling her arm free. And it's his mother's birthday. You work for me, not for him. Lin met his gaze steadily. Tonight I work for the music. She walked to the piano before he could respond. As she sat down and adjusted the bench, she saw Professor Thompson in the back of the room giving her an encouraging nod. Vera Wong was there too, seated with several people Lin didn't recognize, probably representatives from the Arts Foundation. Lin took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of Mozart filled the room, and conversations gradually quieted as people turned to listen. Lin kept her focus on the music, pushing away thoughts of Mr. Harrison, the scholarship, the future. For now, there was only the piano and the melody flowing from her fingers. As the evening progressed, Lin moved through her program. She played pieces she had known since childhood and others she had learned in the past 2 weeks. Some were technically challenging, others emotionally complex, but all came from a place of genuine love for the music. During a brief pause between pieces, Lin noticed a commotion near the entrance. A small elderly woman had entered, leaning heavily on the arm of a younger woman. It was Lin's grandmother, helped by their neighbor. Lin had mentioned the performance, but her grandmother rarely left their small apartment due to her health. Lin felt tears prick her eyes. Her grandmother had sacrificed everything to raise her after her parents died. She had never complained when they had to sell the piano, though Lin knew how much it had hurt her to see it go. For her next piece, Lin chose the Debussy requested by Thomas Wu. The familiar, dreamlike melody of Clair de Lune filled the ballroom. Lin played it with a gentle touch, thinking of Thomas's mother and her own parents, all the loved ones who live on in the music they cherished. When she finished, she looked up to see Thomas wiping a tear from his eye. Her grandmother was smiling, her lined face glowing with pride. Even Mr. Harrison, standing by the bar, seemed affected. His usual hard expression softened somehow. During the dinner portion of the event, Lin played more substantial pieces. She had saved the most challenging for last. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a piece her father had been teaching her before the accident. She had never mastered it then, but in the past 2 weeks, she had worked on it during every spare moment, determined to honor his memory. As she launched into the fiery, technically demanding piece, she could almost feel her father's presence beside her, guiding her hands. The music built to a dizzying intensity, her fingers flying across the keys at a speed that seemed impossible. When she reached the final triumphant chords, the entire room burst into applause. Lin stood and bowed, breathless and exhilarated. Thomas Wu approached the piano, followed by several other executives. That was extraordinary, he said, shaking her hand enthusiastically. I've heard professional pianists who couldn't play Liszt with such passion. Thank you, Lin said, still catching her breath. Tell me, Thomas lowered his voice, Are you really just the hotel's cleaner who happens to play piano? Because that seems like a terrible waste of talent. Lynn glanced at Mr. Harrison, who was making his way toward them with a tight smile. I'm figuring things out. Well, figure quickly, Thomas said. My company sponsors several artists each year. We provide funding for education and performance opportunities. I'd like to discuss that with you. Mr. Harrison reached them before Lynn could respond. I see you've discovered our hidden treasure, he said smoothly. Lynn has been with us for some time, developing her talent under our guidance. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Fascinating approach, having her clean rooms to develop her musical abilities. Mr. Harrison's smile faltered. We believe in a holistic approach to artist development. Thomas turned back to Lynn. As I was saying, I'd like to discuss sponsorship opportunities with you. Here's my card. Call my office next week. As he walked away, Mr. Harrison's facade crumbled. This was not part of our arrangement, he hissed. You work for the hotel, not as a freelance performer. I never claimed to be anything else, Lynn said quietly. They asked questions. I told the truth. The truth, Mr. Harrison scoffed. The truth is you'd be nothing without this opportunity. I gave you a chance to play, to be heard. You gave me a chance to be humiliated. Lynn corrected him, finding courage she didn't know she had. You never intended for me to succeed. Their conversation was interrupted by Lynn's grandmother, who had made her way slowly to the piano with her neighbor's help. Lynn, she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Your parents would have been so proud. Lynn embraced her grandmother gently. I was playing for them. And for you, Mrs. Zhao. Vera Wong appeared at their side. I'm Vera Wong from the Arts Foundation. I've been speaking with your granddaughter about scholarship opportunities. Lynn's grandmother looked confused. Scholarship? For music school, Vera explained. Your granddaughter has extraordinary talent. With proper training, she could have a real future as a concert pianist. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. If you'll excuse us, this is hardly the time or place. Actually, said a new voice, I think it's exactly the right time. Professor Thompson had joined their small circle, leaning on her cane. I've already spoken with my colleagues at Westridge. We're prepared to offer Lynn a full scholarship for the coming term, with housing included. Lynn's grandmother clutched her arm in surprise. Is this true? Lynn nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Mr. Harrison's face had gone pale. I'm afraid Lynn is under contract with the hotel. She can't simply, I think we can work something out, Professor Thompson said, fixing him with a steely gaze. Unless you'd prefer I tell these lovely corporate clients how you forced a cleaning girl to play piano as a form of public humiliation, only to discover she had more talent in her little finger than you've had in your entire career. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Mr. Harrison looked away. We can discuss contract details tomorrow, he said stiffly. For now, the hotel congratulates Lynn on her performance. As he walked away, Lynn realized something had shifted. The balance of power had changed. For the first time since she started working at the Grand Plaza, she wasn't afraid of losing her job, of disappointing her grandmother, of failing to make ends meet. For the first time in 3 years, she had options. And all because Mr. Harrison had tried to break her spirit, but had awakened her talent instead. 3 months later, Lynn stood outside the Grand Plaza Hotel, looking up at its gleaming facade. The building that had once seemed so intimidating now felt smaller somehow, more ordinary. She adjusted the strap of her new shoulder bag, a gift from her grandmother to celebrate her first semester at Westridge Conservatory, and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby hadn't changed. The same crystal chandeliers, the same plush carpets, the same quiet hum of expensive comfort. But Lynn had changed. Her posture was straighter, her steps more confident. The gray cleaning uniform had been replaced by a simple blue dress and a light jacket. Her hair, once always pulled back severely for work, now fell softly around her face. Lynn, Mrs. Chen hurried across the lobby, arms outstretched. We didn't expect you until this afternoon. They embraced warmly. Mrs. Chen held her at arm's length, examining her with motherly pride. Look at you. A real music student now. I'm still me, Lynn said, smiling. Just with a lot more homework. The staff will be so excited to see you. Mrs. Chen linked her arm through Lynn's. Everyone's been following your progress. We've got the article from the local paper pinned up in the break room. Hotel cleaner wins prestigious music scholarship. You're our celebrity." Lynn laughed. "Hardly a celebrity. I still practice 8 hours a day and my teachers say I have years of work ahead of me." "Of course you do. Nothing worth having comes easy." Mrs. Chen guided her toward the ballroom. "But first you have an audience waiting." Lynn had agreed to return to the hotel for one special performance. Thomas Wu had kept his word about sponsorship, creating a small foundation to support young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. Today was the official launch, held at the Grand Plaza where it had all begun. The ballroom was filled with people, hotel staff, members of the Arts Foundation, Thomas Wu and his corporate colleagues, Professor Thompson and several faculty members from Westridge, even a few local reporters. Lynn's grandmother sat in the front row, wearing her best dress, her eyes bright with pride. And in the back of the room, standing apart from the others, was Mr. Harrison. Lynn hadn't seen him since the day after the corporate event. Their final meeting had been tense but surprisingly civil. He had released her from her contract without argument, even offering a small severance payment. Whether it was genuine goodwill or fear of bad publicity, Lynn wasn't sure. As Lynn made her way to the piano, people smiled and nodded. A few reached out to touch her arm or pat her back. She felt a wave of gratitude for this unlikely community that had formed around her talent. Strangers who had become supporters, co-workers who had become friends. Professor Thompson gave her a brief nod from her seat. The old teacher was not one for excessive praise, but her standards were exacting. In the months Lynn had studied with her, she had learned more than in all her years of playing before. Each small nod of approval was earned through hours of practice and refinement. Lynn settled herself at the bench, adjusting her posture the way Professor Thompson had taught her. The ballroom fell silent. This was the same piano where Mr. Harrison had tried to humiliate her, the same room where her life had changed course. She looked out at the audience and began to speak. Her voice, once timid, now carried clearly through the room. "Thank you all for coming today. When I first played this piano, I was wearing a cleaning uniform and shaking with fear." A small ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. "I never imagined where that moment would lead. Today I want to thank everyone who helped me on this journey. Mrs. Chen and the hotel staff, Vera Wang and the Arts Foundation, Thomas Wu and his new initiative for young musicians, Professor Thompson and Westridge Conservatory." Lynn paused, her eyes finding her grandmother. "Most of all, I want to thank my grandmother who sacrificed everything to raise me, and my parents, whose love of music lives on in every note I play." She took a deep breath. "Today I'll be playing a piece I've been working on for the past 3 months. It's called The Cleaner's Sonata. I composed it myself with guidance from my professors." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Lynn hadn't told anyone she was composing her own music. This piece tells the story of loss, perseverance, and unexpected second chances. It's dedicated to everyone who has ever felt invisible, everyone who has hidden their talents out of necessity or fear, and everyone who has helped another person shine. Lynn's eyes found Mr. Harrison at the back of the room. Their gazes locked for a moment. She didn't smile, but she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. After all, without his cruelty, she might still be silently dusting the piano instead of playing it. She turned back to the keys and began to play. The piece opened simply, with a melody that echoed the folk songs of her grandmother's village. It evolved into something more complex, sections that evoked the rhythm of cleaning, the monotony of hidden labor, the quiet dignity of work, often overlooked. The middle movement expressed longing and loss, with echoes of her father's favorite composers. The final movement built to a triumphant resolution, not a simple happy ending, but something more nuanced, acknowledging both pain and joy, both struggle and transcendence. As the final notes faded, Lynn looked up to see tears on many faces. Her grandmother was weeping openly, as was Mrs. Chen. Even Thomas Wu, the polished CEO, was blinking rapidly and clearing his throat. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, clapping and calling out praise. Lynn stood and bowed, the way her father had taught her long ago, honoring both the music and those who received it. As the crowd surged forward to congratulate her, Lynn noticed Mr. Harrison slipping quietly toward the exit. On impulse, she excused herself and followed him into the hotel corridor. "Mr. Harrison," she called. He stopped but didn't turn immediately. When he finally faced her, his expression was unreadable. "That was quite a performance, Miss Zhao." "Thank you." Lynn hesitated. I wanted to say, no need. He held up a hand. We both know I behaved abominably. I tried to use your talent to humiliate you. It's not something I'm proud of. Lynn was startled by his frankness. That's not what I was going to say. Now it was his turn to look surprised. No, I was going to thank you. Thank me? His eyebrows rose. For what? Lynn chose her words carefully. Not for your intentions, but for the result. That day changed my life. Without that moment, I might never have played again. Mr. Harrison was silent for a moment. You know why I did it, don't you? Why I was so cruel? I think so, Lynn said. You recognized something in me that you'd lost in yourself. He nodded slowly. I was a talented pianist once. Not as talented as you, but I had potential. I chose the business side of music instead. More money, more security. I told myself I was being practical. Over time, I became bitter. Seeing people with real passion, with raw talent. He trailed off, then shrugged. It was easier to tear others down than face my own regrets. It's not too late, you know, Lynn said. To play again. For yourself, if nothing else. A sad smile crossed his face. Perhaps. Though I have other amends to make first. Beginning with how this hotel treats its staff. He reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. This is for your grandmother. A proper severance, not the pittance I offered before, and a standing invitation for you to play here whenever you wish, as our honored guest, not our employee. Lynn took the envelope, touched by the unexpected gesture. Thank you. Mr. Harrison straightened his tie, composure returning. You should get back to your admirers, Miss Zhao. I suspect you'll have quite a few in the years to come. As he walked away, Lynn felt a sense of completion. The man who had tried to break her spirit had instead become part of her story of triumph, not as the villain, but as the unwitting catalyst for change. She returned to the ballroom, where her grandmother waited with open arms. As they embraced, Lynn looked around at the unlikely gathering of people who had helped transform a cleaning girl with hidden talents into a student with a bright future. There would be challenges ahead, years of study, financial hurdles, the competitive world of classical music. But today, in this moment, Lynn knew that the hardest part was behind her. She had found her voice. She had reclaimed her music. And in doing so, she had changed not only her own life but also touched the lives of others. From the hotel staff who had rallied around her, to Mr. Harrison himself, a man who had forgotten the joy of music until a young cleaner reminded him of what truly mattered. Lynn smiled at her grandmother and whispered, Dad was right. Music doesn't just fill concert halls, it changes hearts, even the ones that seem most closed.